Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. We'll guide you through the ups and downs of note investing and teach you all about the nitty-gritty details of the business that other people won't talk about. Your host, Dan Deppen, is a former aerospace engineer and product manager who transitioned away from cubicle life to full-time note investing in 2018. Our website is www.fusionnotes.com, where you can subscribe to this podcast, comment, and find links to other information on note investing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Deppen, and today I'm going to be talking about the 12 stages of a note deal. Actually, all the way up to podcast episode 49 now. I got to figure out what I'm going to do for the 50th one next time. But today, what we're going to be talking about is some of my systems and processes that I use within my notes business. One thing I've kind of noticed from looking at some of the podcast downloads and YouTube video views is, and just some of the questions I've gotten, is people seem to really want me to talk more about systems and processes. So I'm going to try to do that today. One of the main things I use in my business is my CRM, right? So CRM is customer relationship manager. And in my notes business, I use Pipedrive for my CRM. Now, I kind of don't really use it directly as a CRM. I kind of bastardize it as a more of a project management tool than anything else. But within Pipedrive, it's got this idea of, so Pipedrive is kind of originally created for salespeople, and it's got this idea of a sales funnel and different stages, right? So the point is, a salesperson will have a prospect and they'll move them through the funnel through the other stages until they actually become a customer. That's not really what I'm talking about at all today in a notes business. What I'm talking about is the different stages that a note goes through, from the time that you buy it throughout the time that you're working it out or just holding it to when you actually either, sell the note, or your note turns into an REO and you sell that, or whatever your exit may be. And I use 12 different stages in Pipedrive to track where my deals are at. I mean, this is great for me because what I can do is I can go to the screen with all of my deals and see what's in what stages. And I get this really quick, just kind of dashboard view of what's going on in my portfolio at any given time. Now, one important thing to keep in mind is, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through each of the 12 stages and talk about what they are. And you may or may not use this in setting something up similar in your CRM. But even if you're not using a CRM, or if you're just starting, I think it'll be helpful to help folks get their heads wrapped around just the different kind of life cycle of a note, right? Because when people talk about these things, a lot of times when people are starting, they're focused on buying notes, but then there's not as much focus sometimes on what you do after you get them. And I hear very little discussed about when you actually sell them and disposition them on the back end. So no matter where you are kind of in your note investing journey, I'm hoping this, will help you a lot. One key thing to keep in mind, right, is notes progress through these 12 stages. Unlike the, salesman funnel I just mentioned, they're not necessarily going linear, right? So your note isn't going to go stage 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 12. A lot of the stages, most of the stages, it's never even going to touch, right? And so sometimes deals go forward and then they go backwards, and, they can take all sorts of twists and turns. What I'm doing in my dashboard view is I'm just trying to understand at this point in time, where are all of my deals at? And Pipedrive does give the ability to go in and look at history of them, but usually I'm just so intimately familiar with every one. I don't need that because I kind of know what they are anyways. So with that, let's jump into talking about the stages. And stage 1, the first one I set up, is just due diligence. And for each of these stages, I'll talk about kind of how I use them and how I define them. So for me, the notes that I put in a due diligence stage, these are ones where an offer has already been accepted by the seller. Now, a lot of times I'm doing early due diligence. Somebody sends me a tape and I'm doing my fast filtering and putting in offers. Most of those never go anywhere because most of those notes either don't make it through my filters, or I make an offer and it's not accepted, or we don't reach a price or whatever. I don't put a note into my CRM and put it in the due diligence stage until the seller has actually accepted an offer. So what's happening in this stage is the offer's been accepted by the seller, but I've not actually closed and funded the note yet. So this gives me a really good way to just keep track of how many notes I have in this stage at any given time. And usually for me, it's like, I've got a couple of in this stage at this time, and then I close, and then, I might not have any in due diligence for a while, right? Notes tend to be kind of for me, it seems to be kind of feast and famine. I seem to go through phases where I'm buying a lot, and then I seem to go through months where I'm not buying at all. That's when I like to start getting everything loaded in the CRM and start tracking it. Now, the next stage is after I've closed, right? So after I've funded the deal, then I move it to stage 2, which is the boarding stage. And so this is the stage where I've already funded the deal, but the service transfer is not complete. And this is kind of a waiting game at this point, right? So depending on the loan servicers you're dealing with, whether it's moving to a new loan servicer, a loan transfer can take anywhere from a couple of weeks. I've had them take like 2 months plus, depending on who the servicers are, and you really need to stay on top of them during that process. And so while this is going on, you're mostly just kind of waiting at this point for the loan to get boarded. So I like to keep track of the deals that are in this stage so that if it starts taking too long or longer than it should, then I can start following up with the servicers. A lot of times you got to hound the servicers to get things going. I've also had situations where I bought a note, the transfer was going on. I checked in with them like a month later and they had like dropped the ball, like nothing had been happening during that time. Now within Pipedrive, one of the things I like to do here is Pipedrive does, and other CRMs do this as well, but you can create these kind of cool, what they call automations. So within Pipedrive, with each deal, you can have what they call activities, which are really like tasks or to-dos. But with these automations, what I can do is I set it up so that if I move a deal from the due diligence stage to the boarding stage, then it already creates a bunch of activities. It automatically creates a bunch of activities and to-dos that are going to happen later. So for example, it'll create tasks for me to verify that the seller shipped me the hard collateral, and I've had situations where sellers have like forgotten to ship the hard collateral. And this can be a tricky thing to keep track of once you start getting a lot of notes. If you're doing like your first or second note, you'll be able just to keep track of that in your head. But when you start getting a bunch of these notes in all various stages, it becomes tricky, right? Because after you close, it may be a week or two until you receive the hard collateral for the seller. And if they never send it and you don't have some system in place, you may not notice, right? It's real easy because you've moved on to trying to close the next notes. And then, you're dealing with foreclosures and you're selling REOs and doing all kinds of stuff. And it's really easy for stuff to get lost in the shuffle. So that's why I like this automation to just set up a lot of those things. The other one that I find handy is it also creates a task to pay any delinquent taxes if there were any on the deal. So one thing that happens commonly is I'll be buying a note and there's some delinquent taxes. I'll work with the seller to negotiate that off the price. But then, so let's say there's $2,000 in delinquent taxes and the seller agrees to lower the price by $2,000. Well, after I close, I still need to go back and pay those delinquent taxes. And again, I don't really want to pay those until I get the loan transferred and everything set up and the loan is actually mine. So that can be an easy thing to forget about down the road. So, a lot of these activities are really key just to stop things from falling through the cracks. And the purpose of all my systems and processes, it's really just to keep things from falling through the cracks as they tend to happen in notes. So after we get the loan boarded, and the servicers, the previous servicers sent out their goodbye letter, and the new servicers sent out their hello letter. And if it's a non-performer, so this is where we get into not every note is going to go through all these stages. So if it's a non-performer, then after I get the loan boarded, I move it to stage 3, which is loss mitigation. So loss mitigation means basically your outreach to the borrower to try to come up with some resolution to this non-performing loan that's not a foreclosure. Obviously, sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. So this is happening, once we've got the loan fully boarded, because you don't want to do any outreach to the borrower until the loan gets boarded and those hello and goodbye letters have gone out, because then they know there's been a change. And generally speaking, it's best if you let your loan servicer handle the borrower outreach and loss mitigation. I do some of it myself. Some people do all of it themselves, but I'm not going to do a deep dive on how all of these stages actually work. I'm more identifying, what they are at some point, but generally your loan servicer's going to be doing that. So this is a point we're trying to do the loss mitigation, but we've not reached a signed agreement. I leave it in this stage until we actually have signatures on paper and everything is kind of official. If your servicer reaches out to the borrower and they say, hey, I'd like to do a deal, I can do this, I can do that. That doesn't really mean anything until the deal actually gets implemented. Now, if we do get a deal implemented, then I'll move it to stage 4, which I call forbearance/trial payment plan, or you could just call it like FB/TPP, forbearance trial payment plan. And so this means an agreement was reached and the borrower signed it. And so now at this point, I'm tracking the agreement in my forbearance tracker spreadsheet. And I like this in a separate bucket, right? Because this is a little different than my loans that are maybe just performing. I watch these loans a little more closely. And then one of the things I need to do as well is note in my CRM, if the borrower fully complies with the agreement, usually the way these are structured, there's a modification at the end if the borrower follows through. So I want to have a note in my CRM to check when this is supposed to be done. Did the borrower comply with the entire agreement? And now do I need to kick off a loan mod? Because last thing you want to do is set up a trial payment plan, borrower follows through, and you forget to set the loan mod, right? Because it's on you to initiate that with the servicer. Stage 5 is deed in lieu. You can also call it, deed in lieu / cash for keys. So what this means is the borrower has agreed to some deed in lieu / cash for keys arrangement, and we have an agreement that's signed. So this is the stage where that deed in lieu agreement is signed, but it's not been fully implemented yet. So typically the way I like to set up cash for keys arrangements are in a 2-step process where the borrower gets some of the money when they sign the paperwork, and then they get the rest of the money when they actually move out, right? So there's always going to be some span of time between when the borrower signs the agreement and they're actually out of the property. Well, I shouldn't say always. I mean, if it was a vacant property, that might be a different situation, but most of the ones I do are owner occupied. So we've agreed to some amount of time before they move. And I obviously want to watch that closely. So this is one where, we've got this agreement in place, but it's not quite an REO yet. And I really like to do these in that 2-stage process because sometimes I've had borrowers kind of go back on deed in lieu agreements, or they say they're going to sign something and then they don't. But by doing it in the 2 phases, by getting them to sign the deed in lieu first, now if they don't follow through and move out, you can at least do an eviction instead of a foreclosure. So I like doing it that way better. And if you set it up in these 2 stages and they drag their feet on signing the first set of docs to actually do the deed in lieu, well, then that's obviously a red flag. They may have gotten cold feet. They may have been kind of doing this as a stall thing for a little bit, hoping you'll give up. Who the heck knows? But that is stage 5 or deed in lieu. Stage 6, I call foreclosure, or abbreviate that as just FC in my CRM. And I call it foreclosure just to make it generic. You could also just call this legal process, because sometimes on contract for deeds, I'm not technically doing a foreclosure. I'm doing a forfeiture in that case. But in my mind, I just refer to it all as the same thing, even though the technicalities of the legal process can be a little bit different. But if I'm moving a deal into the foreclosure stage, then this means that basically I've made the decision to start the legal process. The demand letter may not have gone out yet, right? Because there's the whole process. You got to get payoff and reinstatement quotes and send it to your attorney, have them send out the demand letter. But basically, in my mind, once I've said, okay, I've given up on the loss mitigation, or, the loss mitigation has failed, we had an agreement in place, and the borrower didn't come through on it, we need to start legal now. I want to move the deal in my CRM over into this bucket. And obviously, this is when I really start watching things much closer. So this is one where I've made the decision to start. It's either in process, but we're not all the way through yet to where I've got an REO, right? We're just going through some phase of that legal process. Stage 7, I call just REO or rehab. And this is the stage I hate the most. I've had some great deals that had been REOs. I've had some home runs, and I've had some nightmares. I still need to do my podcast on REO, hoarder house, horror stories, and all that. Maybe I'll save that for Halloween or something later this year. But this means that I've no longer got a note, and now I actually own a piece of property. This could have happened through foreclosure. It could have happened through deed in lieu. It could have, happened a number of ways. But now I'm dealing with a piece of property, not an actual note. Definitely my least favorite stage. And I find that deals in this stage, they just require an outsized portion of my time and energy. It's hard to explain. Some people I talk to think, well, there can't be much to do when it's at this stage, but it's just it's like death by cuts. It just seems like there's all sorts of little things that happen with getting the property secured and dealing with utilities. And, sometimes you secure properties, they don't always stay secured. I've had like attempted copper thefts and floods and all sorts of stuff. It just seems like one of my sayings is like nothing good ever happens when a property is vacant. And then sometimes too, I will take on rehab work. Generally, like in my model of note investing, I try not to end up with REOs. And if I do, I generally just want to sell them as is, as fast as I can, and just kind of get out of there. Now and then when it does make sense, I will do some rehab work, but I try to stay away from that because all of my deals are remote from where I am. So unless I've got like a really good team in place and it really makes sense, I try to stay away from the rehab portion. Sometimes I do it. Like one example of when I did it last year was the borrower had dogs and it just reeked of dog crap like through the whole thing. And so I had it painted with some special paint, had the ducts cleaned because I wanted to get that dog smell out before anybody looked at it. Because, you know how repugnant that is. That's going to make even the hardiest of cash buyers, it's going to slow them down a little bit. So when you do take on rehab, right, there's just all kinds of risks that go through that. There's the risk of getting a bad contractor. There's the risk of them tearing into things and finding more stuff that you then have to fix that you didn't plan on. So generally, in my plan, I like to just deal with notes. That's what I like. I try to stay away from REOs, and when I get them, I try to get rid of them as fast as I reasonably can, and still get to a good exit. Stage 8, I call subperforming. And so what this means is this is a little bit of a nebulous term. Different people will have different definitions of it, but basically it means it's not performing. There aren't payments coming in every month. The borrower is not current. There's some level behind. However, unlike what I would call non-performing, this means that the borrower is making payments, right? It could be that they're making payments every month, but they're behind, or more commonly, what I run into is the borrowers that will just be what I call spotty payers. They might make a couple in a row and then miss one or two and then make a double payment and then make some more and then miss. They're just kind of all over the place. But the bottom line is the loan's not current, but the loan is actually cash flowing, right? The cash flow may not be a single payment coming in every month like it should be, but there's definitely cash flowing in there. So there's no real definition that I know of for this, but generally these loans, they tend to be like 30 to 120 days delinquent. They start getting a lot more delinquent than that. I kind of put them in the non-performing category. And this is really my favorite kind of loan to buy, because I think I've talked about this before, but what a lot of note buyers do that I believe is a mistake is they kind of put notes into two buckets, right? They've got performing notes and non-performing notes. And they kind of have these rules of thumb in their head where it's like, I like to pay X% of UPB or value for non-performing, and I like to pay X% of UPB for performing. Those are both terrible ideas, but I'm just saying what a lot of people do. And so when something's subperforming, they look at it and go, well, not current, it's not performing, so I guess that's non-performing. So I'm going to offer like 40 cents on the dollar or something. But a lot of these loans, when you look at the cash flow over time and how well they're yielding, right, you can buy these at better prices and then end up with really high yields. The rub is, they're going to require more time and attention than a performing note, right? You might be coordinating loss mitigation with the servicer, sending more letters to borrowers, dealing with delinquent taxes more often, all those sorts of things. But overall, I like them because I find I can get good deals on them, more often than I can get deals on other types of loans. And you got to keep in mind, though, with some of these borrowers, like if you do buy a loan as subperforming, some of these I've been able to get fully performing, but a lot of borrowers in this category, like they are just never going to fully perform. There are, some borrowers I've had, it like, I don't care what the situation is, they're not going to make the exact payment every month on time, gun to their head or whatever, like doesn't matter. They're just not going to do it, right? They're going to make some payments here and some payments there. And a lot of these borrowers, like the property, they're not going to lose the property. They're not going to let it go, but they're never going to fully perform either. So, these can become a little bit tricky to exit if you went into it with the plan of, okay, I'm going to get this fully reperforming and sell it at some higher price. You might be able to do that, but sometimes, man, you just can't. Some borrowers will just kind of tread that 90 to 120 day delinquent line to where they're never going to quite lose it in foreclosure, but they're never going to pay reliably and consistently either. It's just kind of the way it goes. One of the things, and talk about how obscure a subject this is. It's kind of funny if you search, when I was searching like subperforming notes on Google, I did a podcast episode on this, and it actually comes up on the first page. So that was episode 39 back on, I think it was September 8th or 9th, 2020. So if you want to And that, go back and listen to that podcast. I go into a little more depth on subperforming loans. Stage 9 is everybody's favorite. So that's performing loans. So this just means, as it sounds, the loan is current and the borrower is making payments every month. What's not to like about this stage? I like to have as many loans as possible, obviously, in this stage because they're cash flowing and probably getting a good return. And it's not a heck of a lot of work, right? As a note investor, there's not a whole lot to keep up with, just other than the normal blocking and tackling of periodically making sure taxes are okay, insurance is okay, all the payments have come in, taking care of some of the basics like that. Stage 10 is bankruptcy. And I put this in its own category because I like to be able to pay a little extra attention to this. So generally in my CRM, I just refer to this as BK. That's what most people in the industry do. And I put notes in this stage that are only actively in bankruptcy. So if the borrowers, let's say, had a bankruptcy in the past that was discharged or dismissed, I don't put it in this category. And the bankruptcy could be BK7 or BK13. I just put them all. I don't have separate stages for those in Pipedrive because I generally don't have that many in bankruptcy at any one time anyway. So I don't want to have too many stages. However, these loans that are in bankruptcy, right, depending on what's going on, the borrower may or may not be making payments. I mean, typically the loans that have an active bankruptcy is generally BK13 where they're paying per the plan. So most of my loans in the bankruptcy stage are actually cash flowing, paying, sort of performing notes, but that's not always necessarily the case. But because, there can be some extra legal work and other things you have to take care of, I like to just keep these in their own bucket so I can kind of keep an eye on them, right? So as the borrower is going through this process, you might have to do things like file a proof of claim, or if it's a BK7, you may need to have a reaffirmation agreement. There's just all kinds of little things potentially that come up. So I like to have these guys in their own stage. Stage 11 is when I'm selling the asset. So that could be selling the note or selling the REO. Okay. And so I move a note to this stage when I have some kind of sale agreement in place, right? Either a sale agreement to sell the note, or if it's an REO, a sale agreement to sell the REO. Usually I don't move them here when I've listed it for sale. Sometimes I do. If I'm like really confident this thing's going to sell fast, then I might move it into this stage. It doesn't really matter one way or another. But, sometimes I have performing loans that I like that I list for sale. If they don't sell, that's fine because I'm happy staying in the deal. Sometimes I might move it into this stage if I'm more motivated to sell. Like, let's say I have an investor on the deal or something and they want to get their cash out to put it into something else or something like that. But once I've got sales pending, I like to track those in their own stage, not just so I can pay attention to them, but so that it's kind of a way of tracking revenue for me, right? So if you look at how the economics of a note investing business works, you've got regular income from your loans that are paying, and then you've got this kind of lumpy gain on sale, either sale of an REO or sale of a note, right? And those can vary, that gain on sale can vary wildly, and they come at kind of random times. So I like to have these kind of tracked a little bit separately. It's just a way of me and my business. I can kind of track what's coming down the pike. And so having this in their own stage helps me a lot. And then, generally if it's a note, that I'm just reselling, for the most part these days, I've just been listing them on PaperStack. Sometimes people contact me directly and I do kind of private sales, but generally if you're out shopping for notes and you're looking for anything that I might sell, just search for Fusion Notes on PaperStack. That's where I've been putting most of my stuff. And then stage 12 is the final stage. And so this is where I put the deal when it's been exited. So this means that the note or property has been sold and I received the proceeds from the sale. So you might ask, Dan, why don't you just close it out of your CRM once this happens? And the reason is once I get the proceeds from sale, I'm not actually done, right? So I don't want to actually close the deal in my CRM until everything related to the deal is buttoned up. So what happens a lot of times is I'll get invoices after the sale. It could be, invoices that hit from the loan servicer or taxes, or sometimes, vendors. I might have had a property manager helping with the REO. A lot of times too, if I had to turn utilities on and put them in my name, a lot of times they want a deposit. So I'm waiting for the utility deposit to come back, which could be several weeks. And then obviously I also need to make sure the investors are paid out. So I leave the deal in the CRM in the States for usually like about 2 months or so. before I actually close it out, because it never fails. I've done this before where I'll close out a deal in my CRM and in QuickBooks, and then I'll get some random miscellaneous bill, or I'll get a check from the electric company for refund, and it's just kind of a pain to go back and close it out. And so the way I handle this with investors too, right? Since it takes a while to get everything closed out, I don't want to hold their money for all of that time. At the same time, I don't want to close it out and then have to go back and ask them for $80 to pay a bill or something like that. So generally what I do is after I get the proceeds from sale, I pay the investor the bulk of whatever is owed to them. And then I hold back like a couple $100 just in case any of these incidentals come in. And then once a certain amount of time has gone by, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks, when I'm confident that everything has come in, then I do the final closeout and I send the investor back whatever I owe, usually like a couple $100 or something at that point. So that way I'm not tying up the investor's money needlessly for a long time, but I'm also not closing out prematurely and then creating all this extra churn in my system. And the other thing I do within my CRM at this stage, so I talked about the automation that I have at the beginning when I board. I also have a deal exit automation because there's a lot of other stuff that's easy to forget to do after you close out a deal. Like, for example, if you had forced place insurance turned on, you have to cancel that policy. I added this one in when I forgot to turn FPI off on a deal, and I realized that like 6 months after I sold an REO, I was still carrying insurance for that. And then I have other reminders too. Like usually I like to, when I have an exit, create a case study, put it on my website. I do some financial metric tracking and return analysis and things like that. So the CRM automation is nice because then once I move something to this stage, it kicks off all of those reminders that, I'm not necessarily going to do the same day that the proceeds come in. So those are your deal stages. And this content is based off of a very tiny part of the Note Launchpad online training course that's coming out soon. And that training course, which is not available yet, it's been an interesting process putting this together. What I've tried to do in Note Launchpad is really document everything in my business and gather together all the templates, all the calculators, like all the step-by-step, all the checklists, like everything. And when I originally got into this project, I thought it'd take me a couple weeks to kind of put everything together. And I think I underestimated how much work it was going to take by like a factor of 3. So this will be coming out hopefully in the coming weeks, although I'm not making any promises as far as dates. I am going to have a webinar and more of a dedicated podcast on this coming out sometime soon. We'll just leave that generic and soon. But if you really like these systems and you want to get kind of really all the nitty gritty, just sort of handed with like a step-by-step process of how to do it, then this is something you might want to check out when the time comes. But for now, those are the 12 stages of a note deal. Hope you enjoy that. Learn a little bit more how to kind of track your notes business. And if you're not at the point where you're doing that yet, hopefully that helps you kind of understand, gives you a broad brush of some of the various stages and phases that these deals go through. So I will see you next time. Thanks.